will study cemeteries. They will look at segregated cemeteries across time and assume that there was not these exceptions to the very valid cases. One of the frustrations, which is not with the congregation, but with the archaeology, is very, very narrow glimpses. Because, you know, when we're looking in this graveyard, it was already clear, it was dense. The people were shoulder to shoulder, head to foot. And whether it was a crypt or it was a burial in dirt, we knew that not only were some of these marked at the time, some of them were likely unmarked at the time. And so as we look through to say, well, what is the black section of the cemetery? What does the white cemetery look like, and how would that be in difference? I remember these conversations we had, and I benefited from thinking, okay, the Catholic cemetery that is here, it represents the possibility of us finding graves that have many different ancestries associated with them. And so we didn't have to think to ourselves about these biases going into the data, and we could hopefully let the data bring forth new questions. You know, not that it would solve all every question that anyone wanted, but at the very least, we now had more to talk about. And the biggest fault we would have is to stop asking. And so we continue to ask these questions now and look forward to getting your thoughts, because only through those collective engagements can we truly come to a better understanding. Again, something Dr. Newby Alexander commented on quite a bit while we were having conversations on the phone, so thank you.
Did you say that the people that were taken from the graves are still here, or have they been reburied somewhere else?
The easy presumption as an archaeologist is when we encounter a crypt that is empty, that it has the human remains were recovered and moved to a different place for internment. We did encounter with the construction of the drain that earlier than 1856, 57, 58, they went ahead and impacted some of the burials with that construction process. We've noticed, for instance, at St. Mary's City in Maryland, to think of another Catholic example, when they built their chapel in the 17th century, they built their chapel on top of their own graveyard. And so as archaeologists were excavating, they noticed when the foundations were examined, that when those foundations had hit human burials that predated the 17th century church, they took the bones and they stacked them and pushed them into the side. A very different understanding of how we treat human remains from what we do today. So when we encountered burial 8, it was literally just the head of where the coffin would have been. And we noticed that there was a hole next to it, meaning that throughout the life of the drain, up until the point where the drain was destroyed partially by the construction of the church, they still had things like cats and other animals that were able to access into that human remains, into the burial. So that's why Dr. Coleman actually found evidence of 2 different individuals in just the small portion of that grave that survived, likely because either animals had brought in those bones, or during the construction, somebody had hit multiple burials and put those remains into one place indiscriminately. Not because of anything other than it wasn't really their job, other than to most likely build a drain. And the drain was most likely built by enslaved Africans, or Africans hired out from plantation owners nearby, or free Africans who were essentially being paid to labor in the construction of the city works project.
But the bodies that you exhumed, were they reburied here, or?
They will be reburied with planning with the congregation at St. Mary's Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
That as a requirement of any permit from the state of Virginia from before you actually recover the human remains. You have to have a plan. And so we consulted with Father Curran and the vestry to go ahead and to come up with that. And it was their intent to go ahead and to do it. If they decide to change that, that'll be a decision that they can make. And we're going to be supportive of that as it goes.
Thank you.
Someone else had a question? Comment?
I just said I'd like him to repeat his answer to her question
Yes,
of
ma'am.
the internment because I didn't hear all of it.
It's okay. We intend to work with the congregation to plan a reburial ceremony in St. Mary's Cemetery. That's been the plan from the beginning. And if there's a change in that plan, then we're happy to work with the congregation to fulfill its wishes. She's asking, what is the next step? So we are completing a detailed archaeological technical report, perhaps the most boring document known in existence, but it will provide lots and lots and lots of details for folks who are looking to answer specific questions, and so that they can essentially understand the methodology, the background, the rationale, the process of consultation, copies of the permits, an inventory of all of the artifacts that have been recovered throughout the entire consultation process, which includes monitoring. So for instance, we did find human remains, but they were mixed within disturbed fill that was underneath this portion. So there was a concrete cut line. They had to put in some additional utilities, and we found the back portion of a cranium in that process. So this is where, while not the subject of the study elsewhere, we were always very sensitive when excavating because we knew we could encounter human remains that were disturbed, most likely with the construction of St. Mary's, so that we would make sure they were given the proper attention and respect and reburial at that time. So that's one component. A second component is working to share this information with in a way that is acceptable with the congregation. So when we've asked to go ahead and publish what we found during this process, it's been in consultation with the church. And so from beyond that point, it's largely a question of what the church would like to do as well. Because there's projects like these that can go on for a very long time, but it has to be with the intent that it benefits the congregation, or at the very least with the permission of the congregation. And that's something that me and my colleagues are very attuned to. In the past, when archaeologists and historians and others do this, they don't necessarily pay attention to the primary stakeholder, which is the congregants. And we don't follow that path. We follow what is becoming more common now, which is consultation, large discussions with folks about ways that they want to see this go, and respecting and ceding that power to the congregation. Who's next?
Is it possible that we can get a narrative that could explain it to the average person like me who doesn't know all of the technical and the PFLI and all of that stuff, so that I can understand basically general terms of what we're talking about?
I think it's a high priority goal for us, because I think it's a high priority goal for the congregation.
Is it possible that that presentation could be given to the church to put on the website so that everybody has access to what you found? And the other question is, I have an acquaintance who knew that his grandfather was buried under the church, and he was Irish. I'm wondering why people didn't know. I think the congregation was really expecting that the people buried here were African American. But for many decades, it was an Irish church, and it was started out as French and then Irish and then everybody else. Not that there weren't African Americans here, but I just wonder why that wasn't taken into account in the larger dialogue.
So the presentation that is here today, we asked if the church, if they were capable, that they would record this, which would include this Q&A that follows, which we find to be absolutely essential. If for some reason that's not possible, because it's currently live streaming on Facebook, we can certainly make this presentation and the slides available, and so that can prove to be a further testament to the work that we're doing. I am proud to say that in the consultation we had with the congregation before this, because before each step we needed to have that process, it was made very clear to us that it was not the expectation that the people buried here would be of African descent. It was this desire to understand that the current congregants felt a connection with the past congregants, and the difference between St. Patrick's and St. Mary's and even St. Joseph's would be recognized, but would not be a barrier. That they knew very much so that what we could get is the three whitest people on the planet. But the congregants wanted to know this regardless. They didn't see that as a reason to say no. They said, these are our people. And so for us, it was very freeing because we knew that what your question was is a very reasonable question that a lot of folks would have, which is like, why would we go ahead and do the research if the people we're studying don't look like us or don't come from the same place that we think we come from? And so for us, it was great to know that there was more about this spiritual connection, about this community connection than it would be about anything else. And we'll see where the cards go.
Because the parish is so old, I used to work for the parish. Often we would get telephone calls from people for records, to go back into our records, and they were trying to trace their ancestry, that kind of thing. So I say that to say that I would think I'm not the only person that understands that most of what you found would benefit other people and not us. And just as you said, we're willing to share that information, but this comes up more often than most people would think. Somebody said, my ancestor, great grandfather, is buried under the steps of this church. And that person said that information has always been in the family. So when we started digging, their question was, are you going to dig under the steps? Because my ancestor is buried there, and I'd like that information about them. So it's something that is well known to us.
I remember getting a visit from folks while we were doing the recovery, and at least one of them, I think, showed us a newspaper article that talked about how individuals were recovered underneath the doorway. And so it stuck with me. And I mean, my memory is not as great as it used to be. Oh, who knows? It wasn't even good back then. But it's just those moments remind us about how there's a lot of invested people in this process, and they feel a connection. And being inclusive and being welcoming, which is something that our team has felt since the first day we stepped foot here, has made this an experience that has only enriched my life, much less my career. Well, oh yeah, final word maybe?
Well, since Father Jim isn't present here today, I want to take this opportunity on behalf of him and the congregation here to thank you so very much for the work you've done in pulling this together. I didn't understand all of it either, but at the same time, it was so tremendously interesting and compelling to hear. And coming off of All Saints and All Souls Day, knowing that all the way up there are people still buried here, and that we worship together every day, this just makes it even more personal to us. And I'm certain that any information that you find from this point on, and we decide how to distribute that, could only enhance that spirit that we feel every day that we are in this place. And I have to say that, thank you. And I have to say that one of the things, because I was always on those calls that when you call and say, get over here, and found the mother and child there, I have been wanting to know more about that those people buried there. And this just kind of puts a little closure to this and understanding about what all of this is about. So again, thank you so very much for the work that you did on this.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to hang around a little bit after, so if you have questions you didn't want to say in front of the audience but wanted to follow up with us, we're happy to take those. You also have our contact information. You can get through everyone here at the church, Father Jim, Todd Washington, everyone. Thank you all, and thank you to Luther, throughout which we could not have been able to have this done. Thank you for all of it. Also, thanks the ladies in the cafeteria who fed us on multiple occasions with just this magical tray of delightful goodness during the middle of a pandemic where the only thing you really wanted was to walk out, have some fresh air, and to appreciate the moment you were in. So thank you, everyone, for coming. And yes, stay tuned. We'll have more to share.